600 billion miles. That starts being at least comparable to how many miles Tesla collects with their fleet. Is that true?
Yeah, way more than Tesla.
Whoa.
We process more real-time data than anyone else. We process more data than the New York Stock Exchange. That is big. That is our killer app, because the future traffic is going to include humans driving vehicles and AVs driving.
Wejo is a connected vehicle data company that works with Palantir to organize trillions of data points from millions of vehicles on the road today. Imagine being able to look at the driving and charging patterns of electric vehicles to figure out the best places to build new charging infrastructure. Imagine collecting data from every car's temperature sensors, fog lights, windshield wipers, and brakes to alert other nearby drivers about bad weather conditions and road hazards. Well, you don't have to imagine it, because that's exactly what Wejo is building on top of Palantir's Foundry. Richard Barlow is Wejo's founder and CEO. The last time we spoke was a quarter ago, where he announced their electric vehicle operating system, as well as new collaborations with Microsoft right here on this channel. Since then, the market for high-tech growth stocks has collapsed, and Wejo stock has definitely felt that impact. So I sat down for another exclusive interview with Richard, and we caught up on everything Wejo has been up to, including some big developments they're working on with Palantir in the autonomous vehicle space. If you watch until the end, you'll gain a solid understanding of connected vehicle data, Wejo's newest offerings with Palantir, and the future of autonomous cars and trucks. Full disclosure, I'm not a financial advisor. I took no compensation for this interview, but I am a current Wejo shareholder and may increase the size of my position in Wejo based on this interview. Your time is valuable, so I've cut out all of the fluff, and timestamps are enabled for your convenience. I hope you enjoy hearing about the science behind this stock. I'm here with the CEO of Wejo, Richard Barlow. Richard, it's always great talking to you. How have you been? What's going on?
Yeah, hey Alex, great to catch up. It's been a really interesting second quarter for Wejo as we entered the market last November. We've probably entered the market one of the toughest times, and still smiling.
Yeah.
And today I want to share with you some really interesting new products we're doing. I want to talk to you about our latest results and some of our new clients. So yeah, super stoked, and great to see you again, Alex.
Sure, likewise, and I'm really excited to get into it. So let's start with the basics. Wejo is a connected car company. What is a connected car? What kind of data do you collect, and how do you use it?
Yeah, so the vast majority of new vehicles sold globally, whether a car, a two-wheeler, or a truck, usually have embedded connectivity. And this is a modem, a conventional modem or a router you'd expect to find in your home. If there's an equivalent in the car, which is something called a TCU, a telecommunication unit, that sits on the network of the car. And pretty much anything being reported in the car or in the vehicle can be captured as a data point and then output to a platform. We receive obvious things like, we get live location data from vehicles only with consent of the driver. And we see 6% of vehicles driving around New York. We see 5% of all vehicles, 5 to 6% of all vehicles in California. So we've got huge amounts of data. We also have data in Japan, over Europe, and we're opening in Thailand very shortly as well. So we've got real global coverage of data coming from vehicles. And our last published results showed we have 16.9 million vehicles on platforms sending data.
Whoa.
And we process over 17 billion data points a day. We've processed like 13 trillion data points to date. Over 600 billion miles of data. So huge, massive data asset.
600 billion miles. Yeah. I need to look that up, but that starts being at least comparable to how many miles Tesla collects with their fleet. Is that true?
Yeah, way more than Tesla.
Whoa.
I mean, if you think about Tesla maybe got 2 million cars that could be sending data. We work with General Motors, who are both an investor and a strategic partner of ours. But we work with Honda, we work with Renault, we work with 22 OEMs, as they're called, and tier one manufacturers and fleet providers, which supports this 16.9 million vehicles that send us this data. We've just agreed with a motor manufacturer in the US to now receive live trends of radio data and satellite and listing data from the car. It's on a trend basis, so there's not personal information coming, so we're not embedding cookies or anything like that. But to know in real time if people are listening to what radio station they're listening to, if they're reacting to news, if they're reacting to adverts, those are incredible trends of data. And if our nearest competitors, say Nielsen, that are being acquired for $8 billion at the moment, they still rely on manual surveys to know how to measure ratings of radio stations. Well, we're the first company in the world to have mass volume of radio data coming from vehicles, and it's real time. And our killer app, so to speak, is everything we do is real time. It's why we work with the world's largest mapping companies. We're fixing their congestion analysis, for example. It's why now we're working with huge media companies and telling them for the first time they've ever been able to be able to know this, what radio stations really been listened to. Are the adverts being listened to, or are they being ignored? So true measurement is part of our strategy around real-time processing of data.
I want to drill into that true measurement concept for a little bit. So way more data than Tesla because you integrate with way more manufacturers, all sorts of kinds of data from high level like location, low level like the radio stations people are listening to. Let's drill into a little bit more about that low level data. Do you collect things like when people are braking, windshield wipers, like things that might help you predict other types of things? Like I'm imagining you can use those to predict weather patterns, traffic patterns. Can you walk us through some more of the low level use cases like the radio listening one you just mentioned?
Yeah, so we've just announced that we're completing discussions with a huge insurance provider. We're already into our second agreement with Sompo, or $110 billion Japanese insurance provider, where we're building something called end-to-end insurance, but we're now doing the same in the US, and we're finalizing commercial discussions at the moment with this particular carrier. And what we're giving them is that, yes, we get harsh braking, but we also get, for example, with certain motor manufacturers, we can measure panel damage within 12 centimeters.
Whoa.
So we can estimate before the vehicle's even arrived at the body shop or the recovery lot, what damage has occurred to the vehicle.
Is that just based on sensors in the vehicle? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so there's sensors in the vehicle that have been used for various purposes. So, for example, sensor measures if a vehicle is aquaplaning. So if the wheel is losing traction on water, that same sensor can be used for other use cases. So we're working with the tier ones who build these sensors, and they're saying, well, look, if you reinterpret the data, then this is what else you can learn from the output. So in terms of low-level use cases, we also have, I think, about 200,000 vehicles. We get live weather data. So if you think about, and our main market at the moment is traffic. But if you can overlay, and we have location data to within 3-meter accuracy, so super accurate. If we can then overlay, say, weather data to location, and for example, we know it's 0 degrees outside, and we can then see ABS, so the anti-lock brake, or we can see the vehicles, or we can see some form of aquaplaning. We can then work out exactly where there's black ice on a road. So if we can then, and what we're finding with companies is that they want real-time results. Departments of transport, we're now working with a number of departments of transport in the US, including Texas, for example. And what we're finding with these companies and these departments of transport is they want to know real-time events. And having these low-level data, as you call it, from weather readings or windshield, all radio data provides really interesting outputs, all in real-time environments. So, we can pinpoint hazards on the road in real time. We can pinpoint emissions around cities in real time. We can tell you speeds of vehicles. So the use cases are almost infinite. And we now have access to up to 220 sensors in vehicle. And, we're processing up to 470,000 data points a second within platform, and we provide real-time results from all that data we process. We don't batch process. We do hold historic data for machine learning, but in terms of all our insights are driven by real-time outcomes.
Yeah, that's huge. So basically what I'm hearing you say is you're getting data from all of these sensors, but there's really multiple use cases depending on the certain data streams and how you mix and match them. For example, using windshield wipers and braking data to look at weather patterns, overlaying weather data to course correct for exactly where those patterns are, looking at panel damage using sensors that aren't designed to necessarily measure that, but sort of remixing the data that you're getting in novel ways to address real business cases for multiple verticals, insurance, traffic management, and so on. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and how we work with the OEMs, the auto manufacturers, is that they want us to be a broad platform, a broad marketplace. So even the last week, we've added another OEM that wants us to launch a European-wide insurance program. And that's because we've shown a discipline around, we've got the best tech, we process more real-time data than anyone else. We process more data than the New York Stock Exchange. That is big. That is our killer app.
Whoa.
We're working with Microsoft Maps and helping them identify real-time congestion within Azure Maps. We're working with other mapping companies I can't name. Hopefully I can name soon. We're in discussions with AV companies about how we can help them identify in real time temporary construction work on a road that's only there for, say, a 3-hour period on the same day. Whereas
Whoa.
historic data assets or machine learned data assets will make assumptions on where congestion is, will make assumptions on where they think roadworks are, whereas we know in real time. So the use cases are infinite. So we've just said in our guidance today, we're sticking to our guidance for the year. We're happy where we're doing. And the rollout of our marketplace is by signing with another OEM last week, the UBI agreement for Europe, adding to the others we're already in place with. We're deploying in remote diagnostics, so consumers can see live data from their vehicles and actually arrange for their vehicles to be repaired based on connected vehicle data. We're going to fleets as well. So we've got a real broad array of markets. And the key then thing is that we have either exclusivity in defined markets or something called preferred partner status with other OEMs, where if we have an agreement in place in a market, subject to the OEM not having a pre-existing relationship in place, we have that exclusivity in a market. So we're protecting our positioning in terms of the flow of data and the investment we have to do to process the data. And now we're rolling out these multiple markets.
So I assumed that Wejo has always been a B2B business, right? You're helping other OEMs, you're helping departments of transportation, you're helping big enterprises do things around connected vehicles. I believe in our 3 interviews now, this is the first time I've heard you say, a consumer use case, right? Where consumers can see the diagnostics for their own cars, schedule things like repairs. Can you walk us a little more about like your consumer side?
Well, so we're a B2B business, but we're building solutions, as some people might refer to as SaaS or PaaS, software as a solution or platform as a service. But we're building the systems behind the scenes, and then we white label for OEMs or we white label for repair shops. But we're building the proposition. We're going through the design, the iteration, the design, the UX, the UI. We're doing the whole thing. So we are a B2B business, albeit. Actually, I think we're more of a B2B2C business because ultimately I want the driver of the vehicle, whether they're in a car shell, whether they're in a vehicle, there needs to be a clear process of giving consent to data. And I want Wejo to be trusted as a brand that if Wejo's looking after your data, we are not cynically selling to the highest bidder. We are making this, we call it for data for good. We're making sure that we don't share data without consent. We're making sure that even when we have consent, we only share data on a trend basis for things like traffics. Only if we have 2 consents would we ever share personal information. So Wejo will become a consumer brand, but we're here to power things. So we've started building the EV OS with Palantir, where we want to be known as powered by Wejo and Palantir. That's the same with other propositions, where we want consumers to have the trust that Wejo is there with the data, as opposed to being the final sort of engagement with that consumer in a particular application.
Sure, yeah. So the reason I'm looking at my phone is because I actually just had my car go to the shop for a recall, and they actually installed a new wiring harness, and they made me download this new app called Motion for Audi. So I don't drive an EV yet, I drive an Audi. But one of the things that they do is they ask me to collect data. They look at my journeys and they tell me all sorts of different things about my car in real time or near real time. So are those the kinds of consumer apps that we're talking about that Wejo could or will get involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are building apps like that. We work with VW in the US, not with Audi. We do work with Audi in Europe. So we are working with brands like that. And those particular use cases you've given, we've not been involved with, but those are great examples of the sort of things we will design. But critically, we're becoming a trusted platform where there are no standards in industry. Even an OEM where they have differing makes and models, there will be different data standards internal to that organization. So we can standardize for OEMs even their own data to present back their insights, present back a sort of a standard way of being able to interpret the data to then build these applications. And then to the extreme of we have a solutions business where we're being paid more and more money to actually design great experiences for consumers. We announced in our last earnings call that with one particular OEM now, we run their global consent program, where if a consumer in the millions of consumers, if they're giving consent in their car or in another outcome, we're managing that whole process from end to end.
Whoa!
It's not deep vertical integration, but it's a way of us actually providing assurance to the OEM about the data asset having true consent and providing great outcomes from that data.
I think that's super important. Like a lot of retail investors are going to watch this, and things like consent and compliance seem like boring topics, but in reality, when new consent laws around data come out around e-commerce or financial data, they can really make businesses struggle. So I think that's actually a really super important call out, that you guys take all of the actual steps to verify that the data you're getting in is truly consented. I'm sure you're doing other things like verifying it's stored correctly, verified that it's at the right level of identity or lack of identity, anonymizing the data, for example. I think giving those assurances goes a long way to having a long-term strong value proposition, because the last thing anyone, especially investors, want to hear is about like data hacks, compliance issues. They're only boring issues until they're not, because they start affecting the rest of the business. So that's really cool that you manage that part of the process as well, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and it's foundational. I mean, Wejo to me means we journey, and it's this idea is that you need to have, all companies need to have an open conversation with drivers, with consumers of vehicles around their journey data. So don't try and hide it. Embrace the idea, and then our consent take up is by majority. It's getting consent is not difficult if you provide a clear value exchange, if you provide clear benefits to consumers. If you've ever used Google Maps, I'm sure you've had that frustrating experience of not seeing the congestion on the app, and yet you're driving in congestion.
For sure.
Even ways, all mapping companies, they don't do real-time processing of all the data they get back from their consumers. They've built complex models. They've machine learned, and they pretty much predetermine where they believe congestion is going to be. There's flaws in that. There's flaws on minor roads, and there's flaws in terms of they can't predict when someone's going to crash. With how we just got itself involved with, and why we're working with mapping companies now, is that we're providing real-time input to their products to improve things like congestion analysis. We used one well-known mapping company yesterday with an ETA calculation, and then we used our own products, and we compared like for like a mapping screen, and our competitors, our other mapping product showed no congestion whatsoever, and yet we were in congestion, yet our own product was showing the congestion in real time. We're providing the similar outputs to all mapping companies now, and to a lot of other OEMs.
Sure. No, I think everyone listening to this can relate to being told there's no traffic on your route, only to end up in traffic for miles and miles because of construction, lane closures, and things like that. Actually, that real-time data was the other thing I wanted to double click on. So we know that you're partnered with Palantir, and the reason to partner with Palantir is to do these types of complex things on real-time data. Can you walk us through a little bit about your relationship with Palantir and what you use them for?
We use their Foundry products in a number of ways, both internal, such as InfoSec. They've got some incredible products, for example, around data governance. They are market leading, and so we use them for internal tools. We also use them for the management of data out to third parties with their Foundry product. And the first product we built, and we co-built with Palantir, was something called the EV infrastructure operating system. And the thing that really excites me is that, and I'm still a petrol head. I have not yet embraced the EV. And one of my sort of reticences is I had an EV a few years ago, and range anxiety is real.
Sure.
And infrastructure is getting better, but I went there, the range anxiety just didn't give me a satisfactory experience. I came back to petrol. Well, what we've built with the EV operating system is that we've identified that if there's going to be, with regulation getting involved as well, if there's going to be mass adoption of EV vehicles, the answer isn't for huge infrastructure investment everywhere to be able to support the EV charging demands. That would the budgeting requirements for that would be hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, look, the Biden Act, the Infrastructure Act, they've budgeted about $5 billion for infrastructure investment. Well, what we've learned from all the vehicles we have live on platform, and we have over 300,000 EVs live on platform, we know the true use of EVs. We know how the EVs are driven. So, for example, we know a typical EV is driven 40 miles a day. Yeah, that's typical. Now, look, there will always be the odd longer term journey, but we're learning all this. So the benefits to that is that we've now built a live operating system where in real time, an OEM can query us, and we can say when that vehicle should recharge itself. So rather than you leaving your vehicle charged in overnight and you being indifferent or whatever about when the vehicle charges, Actually, what happens is you plug it in, it charges. Well, that's not great for utilities companies for the grid. They want to be able to stagger control when charging occurs.
Sure.
So if we can inform the community of utilities companies about saying, well, we know this batch of cars in this zip code are always plugged in between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. Well, then it doesn't matter if there's a staggered or throttled way of charging those vehicles. So they might say, well, this group of vehicles will charge at 8 p.m. This group of vehicles will charge at 2 a.m. Well, you as a consumer don't care. What you want is you want to know you've got enough charge the following day to be able to do your journeys. So having an AI driven or a machine learn driven really way of understanding about when EVs should be charged is our next killer app. And we built that as a partnership with Palantir. So and it's all behind the scenes is the foundry. So we've built a really strong relationship with Palantir. It takes time, but they've been super public about us as a partnership.
Yeah.
This is just the start. We're doing more and more with them.
So the EV OS, the electric vehicle OS, seems to be more about optimizing charging and helping utilities. Is it also about like adding new infrastructure in the right places to reduce that range anxiety? For example, hey, if we put 3 chargers in these exact locations, now everyone's within 100 miles of a charger no matter what? Or is it really more about this overnight charging and staggering to reduce the load on utilities?
No, so we started before we launched EVOS with advising utilities companies on where to install chargers, and we provide that with visualizations. We provide that with live feeds out to planning platforms. So that's where we started, and it's when we were doing that did we realize the demand from utilities companies about there needing to be a more intelligent way to approach this. You see headlines of parking lots needing to budget $3-4 million to be able to afford to be able to provide the EV charging points to support the expected demand, and the model's not there to support that. The parking fees will not support that sort of upgrade. If there's a more intelligent way of understanding about the demands that are going to be in that parking lot, rather than just the assumption that all EVs going in there will be plugged in, will want to be fully charged throughout. If you can provide that intelligent layer, then that means the utilities companies can say to the parking lot, well, actually, the upgrade costs won't be this cost, but actually will be a fraction. That's the real benefit to society, because ultimately that then saves costs to consumers. And, we're all very sensitive now of the rising cost of energy. I was talking to a parking lot vendor this morning, and he was telling me that a year ago, his annual lighting bill was £30,000. And he's now saying it's £100,000.
Oh my gosh.
And he said that's just the lighting bill in the parking lot. So he wants an intelligent way of being able to manage his costs, and so there needs to be a better approach than just saying, well, there's going to be this many vehicles, they all charge. If they're all parked for this period of time, they'll all charge that time. Therefore, we need this much capacity in there. That will just be a massive overinvestment where the outcome will be very expensive for all of us. So that's what we're so excited by EVOS.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I didn't realize all the different moving pieces for electric vehicle charging infrastructure and how those costs are calculated and then, offloaded to the consumer. I think, staggering charging, understanding the actual utilization, those are real great use cases for the EVOS. One of the things that I'm excited to have you break on this podcast is about the AVOS, the Autonomous Vehicle Operating System. So you're launching that second product with Palantir. Give us a high-level overview of the AVOS compared to the EVOS.
So we're super excited. For the last 3 years, we've been working in a lab environment on a focus on AV, and that's been something close to my heart. And it's about doing good for society. So today, the breaking news is we're launching something called AVOS, the Autonomous Vehicle Operating System. And there's 2 outputs for that. The first output is we built a digital simulation environment called Meta Twin. And that's where you can choose any city in the US, and you can see physical vehicles driving around with a very low latency of a few minutes from real-time data collection from live vehicles. Beyond that, you can then test how another vehicle being added to that environment would behave in certain parameters. So you can set your vehicle to be driving at a certain speed, you can set the weather conditions, you can set the time of day. We'll then tell you how all the other vehicles that we've already got data from would actually change their own behaviors. Beyond that, we built a physical mule for the AV industry to trial new outcomes. This is a white label powertrain from an OEM where we've then built on our own proprietary approach to receiving LiDAR data and image data. And we built this to benchmark. We built this to help the AV industry mature their outlook. At the moment, there are very few live AVs on the road. So we've built both a simulation environment for AVs to be able to test how their own algorithms would behave in almost any road in the US. But beyond that, we've also provided a mule where they can actually real live tests in a physical vehicle. At the moment, AVOS, this is about being able to visualize about how humans behave in vehicles and therefore how AVs should correspondingly behave. By collecting such a huge data asset, and we've created an incredible number of what we call data proxies, we understand over 17 million instances of how humans would behave if in a certain set of parameters. And that's because we've seen vehicles coming together and physically. And if vehicles are coming together physically, and we've had data from both those vehicles, we've got incredible learnings about what happens next or what happened before and after. So if two vehicles are on two different lanes of a highway, they're doing different speeds, and then one inadvertently crashes into the other, we can tell you about, well, actually how the vehicle that was crashed into behaved just before. Did they brake sharply? Did they swerve left? Did they swerve right? What were the road conditions? What were the weather conditions? What was the time of day and therefore the lighting? All these parameters. So we've machine learned a huge number of outcomes, and we're now showing that in a digital simulation where an OEM can come to us with their AV departments and preset how they want their AV to operate within our simulated environment. And we can say to you, pick any city. It's not just limited to, you normally think about AVs being limited, apart from Tesla, you think about AVs being limited to elements of the West Coast, for example. You can pick any city, you could pick Minneapolis, you could pick anywhere, and we could then show you how humans currently are driving around and how they would behave differently in a vehicle if you simulated another vehicle being in that congestion or being in that line of traffic.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I want to talk about there. I recently listened to NVIDIA's keynote speech where they talked about how they're going to be mapping, basically the highway networks of the US, Asia, Europe, and so on. But what you're saying is very different. What you're saying is you can go literally anywhere. Can you give me an estimate of how, what percentage of all roads you plan to have mapped, or help me put that in context?
Yeah, I mean, we've taken every road that we've ever received data from. So, we've got coverage of 95% of roads in the US. Now,
95. When you say roads in the US, sorry, do you mean literally all roads in the US?
Yeah. So the smallest road. If we've received data, then we've built the analysis for that, and that's important to us. We think it's important to society to not limit. Now, our coverage, on average, is about 1% of all vehicles driving around in the US. In terms of a real-time event at any one point. And then we've got extremes of 5-6% of all traffic in New York and 5-6% of all traffic in California. Sure. Whereas I mentioned Minneapolis before, I think we're 0.8% of all vehicles in that particular area. We over-index in certain areas and we need to collect more data. But principally, 95% of roads in the US, we can give you some data around how people driving right now behave in certain set parameters. And you can set the parameters within the platform. So you can say, I want heavy rain at 3 p.m. And I want to see 100 cars on a road in an hour. Set those parameters, and we'll then tell you actually the average speeds those vehicles are driving at. And then you can then simulate your AV trying to be in that traffic. And then you can set experiences such as, well, I want this AV to speed just to test, or to be running at a different speed, or to be slowing traffic down. We can then show the outcomes of that. And also, it's not just vehicle volume; it's profile of drivers, it's profile of vehicle vehicle manufacturer as well. So we do over-index even if we're low on volume in certain profiles of drivers. So this is a work in progress for us. And a part of our guidance is that we're forecasting to have more than 27 million vehicles on platform this year. We're happy with that guidance, so we're going to continue adding data and adding OEMs to our group who give us more and more data. And not just in the US, we will also eventually be deploying AVOS and EVOS in Europe and the Far East, where we're already in Japan, and we will shortly be in Thailand.
The AVOS seems like it's made for OEMs and manufacturers trying to bring autonomous vehicles to the market, right? And now they're coming to you and they have data for training, testing. They can also look at specific use cases. Are there any other consumers of this data, customers of this AVOS product?
Yeah, I mean, so every DOT now, Department of Transport, sorry, has now an AV division. Every insurance provider, significant insurance provider, is now considering about whether they need to be offering AV insurance.
Yeah.
So for us, our core market has been what we call traffic management, and traffic management is a very broad definition of mapping. It's understanding parking. Well, determining AV behaviors we see as part of traffic, because the future traffic is going to include humans driving vehicles and AVs driving, and they're all going to need to work together. And at the moment, we understand how most drivers behave in most set circumstances, including outliers. There's not enough data about how AVs will drive.
Right.
They're very much the differing AV companies out there will have a proprietary way of actually building their own, of learning how they're going to drive on roads. So by providing a platform to enable sort of potential sharing of non-confidential information so we can better understand in society about how AV is going to operate, DOTs, Department of Transport, want to understand that. And so every DOT has now an AV department.
Yeah.
The DMV have got over 40 OEMs who've already been given licenses. Insurers want to be able to understand about how AVs will need to be insured. And then there's other industries as well. This is just the start. We're not even thinking about repairs of AVs or how AVs need to be recharged at some point during the day. And that's when AVOS could become a great sort of combination with EVOS. But at the moment, they're completely separate products,
Sure.
Separate design teams, separate everything. But you could see the future.
Yeah, I'm imagining almost a future where you have the EVOS and the AVOS working together to help autonomous electric vehicles plan their route for like global optimized charging that minimizes the load on the grid or saves traffic, has some constraint that requires knowing how AVs drive and where EVs need to charge based on what's actually going in the world, construction, traffic, and all that kind of stuff. That's super cool.
My son, he wanted to do a video. He sees me doing podcasts with you, and he said, I want to do a video. And so, he decided he wanted to do his video. Like, data's boring.
What's data? Sounds boring.
So he did.
Sure.
He did data's boring, and he got organic reach, and he loves telling his sister he's had more views than her on his video on channel. So last week I was driving, held my phone like this, and he was sat at the back of the car, and I told him about AVOS. And I thought, I want to do this because if a 5-year-old understands about how AVOS is going to be a benefit to society, then everyone will understand. So I told him about what AVs will mean for his generation. And he said at the end of it, data's not boring anymore. And
that's really cool.
And then, when you've got your own, somebody who doesn't respect his dad, he does, but he wants to rebel. He goes, data's cool. He said, does that mean that I can do click and collect at a toy store and get toys brought to my own AV? Can the AV take me to school? Can the AV take me to McDonald's? And everyone's going to have different mobility challenges, but it's going to start with the data that's going to enable this all to happen.
I think that's a really important call out too. I feel like most people, let alone most investors, don't really have a full grasp of the impact of what it means when we will no longer be driving cars, but cars will be driving us, and what that unlocks for people with mobility challenges today, for people who can't drive yet, and all of the edge use cases like the ones you just mentioned, but even just autonomous last mile delivery. So I think you're really building a product where you're using data for good, and that really matters in like the low level applications, not just as a high level mission statement that you post on a wall. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, and I think in terms of an analogy, I think we're almost back to where we were in 2007, 2008, where the previous generation of mobiles were starting to, the likes of BlackBerry was sort of starting to lose their market share, and then suddenly there was iPhone and Android, and it was a completely different way of using your phone. And I see exactly the same thing now happening in mobility. I think we're just at the start. I think the likes of Uber have done an incredible application layer almost before the actual automotive sector, apart from Tesla, being ready for it. I think now, in terms of automotive and mobility, we're almost like 2008 again, where we're going to completely show a different way of adopting vehicle usage. And I saw an interview with Elon Musk a couple of weeks ago, or it was a response on his Twitter feed. His prediction is there's going to be more cars on the road, or more vehicles on the road, and more journeys with AV adoption, because AV adoption will make journeys easier, because people won't need to stress about getting in the car and finding somewhere to park. They'll just know that on an on-demand basis, an AV is available, that they can call in, it will pick them up, take them to wherever. They won't worry about where that vehicle's gone. They'll be able to summon another one when they're ready to go home.
Sure.
So I think mobility adoption, AV adoption, is going to suddenly explode over the next couple of years. And just like in 2008, we suddenly were faced with this with iPhone, and the first OS on iPhone was quite basic. There wasn't an app store. And then by 2009, 2010, the App Store started being more prevalent. Same with Android. I think we're going to get exactly the same view in mobility, and it starts with strong operating systems that enable applications. And behind that, it starts with amazing amounts of data to make informed decisions, and that's where Wejo is, and why we've partnered with Palantir and with Microsoft.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great segue into what we should talk about next. So I want to talk about several of the different AV OS components that you mentioned. Let's start with the digital, and then we'll move on to the physical. So one of the things you talked about was this meta twin. When I think about digital twins, or when people think about digital twins more broadly, a lot of different things come to mind. So for example, NVIDIA's version of a digital twin would be something like a real 3D simulation. Palantir's version of a digital twin is more like a map of your data, this ontology layer where you can see all the entities and how they relate to each other. When Wejo says digital twin, what do you mean?
So the first thing is that this is the first example of edge-based processing with our Neural Edge portfolio. So we announced Neural Edge at the beginning of this year, and it's this idea of edge-based processing. But edge-based processing isn't just at the cloud, it's also at the client. So what we've actually built in terms of our meta twin is that we've built edge-based processing to render complex scenes. So you put a request within our user interface to be able to go to a city. It's a 3D model of a city, and then you start determining how vehicles are going to drive around, and you can determine the number of other vehicles that will be driving around you. That's all rendered within the client that we've developed in-house for you to be able to visualize how a city will behave with more vehicles being added, or is currently behaving with all these vehicles. So at a very simple level, you could not do any sort of simulation with new vehicles. You could just see cars driving around and just seeing what happens next. So you can pinpoint an intersection where there may be a crash. We can show these two vehicles coming together and how they actually then settled after a crash. And the implications, say, the emergency services of understanding how these things are currently being treated is really powerful. And how long was the vehicle left at an intersection before it was recovered? We've got that sort of timings. So this digital simulation environment isn't just for AV. It's more broader about understanding in a three-dimensional environment what is happening with traffic right now.
So it's real-time traffic data and 3D models of the city, and you're seeing how everything interacts?
I mean, our latency is minutes, not hours.
Whoa.
So, I mean, our latency is sub a minute on a raw data basis, a common data model basis. So we take raw data in, we translate it, we provide insights back out. We do that in less than a minute. That's our latency. In terms of presenting back to our clients to then render, you need to add a few more minutes, but we're not talking an hour. So you can get a near enough true visualization of a city. It's a big overhead, it's a big heavy lift. But it gives you a full view of a city.
I have a really low-level data question. For traffic lights, do you get information from the traffic light itself if it's smart infrastructure? Or are you collecting, like, this traffic light was red because a camera saw it and we get the camera data? How are you determining, like, literally what the traffic lights are, for example, at any given time?
So we have a traffic light analysis product, and we enrich it with smart data. We enrich it with our own algorithm where we can determine when a traffic light is on red or amber or green. we can determine that by knowing about if vehicles are parked. But it's not just that. We know if a vehicle's parked at a traffic light we know is there, and then the seatbelt's deployed, then we know the vehicle is actually parking. The person's going to get out of the car, for example. And we also see seat data. Whereas if the vehicle is left in drive but is parked, the seatbelt's left in, then we know they're waiting to be able to set off again. So we've got all sorts of routines to be able to translate an imperfect world. There are tens of thousands of vendors in the US who analyze traffic, who all use different tools. There are some great tool sets such as Esri, but very little actually standard in industry. So we're providing our output, and we're identifying certain third-party data assets, but we've got a unique position that we've got millions of vehicles driving around every day who are giving us real-time views, and we know the seatbelt deployment, we know if the vehicle's gone in park, we know if the car's idle, we know seat occupancy. So it's incredibly rich data we've already got that helps us build this unique data asset.
Yeah, this digital twin sounds like it solves a lot of different use cases, or at least helps a lot of different types of businesses, not just the AV market for, people who want to provide autonomy as a service or need to analyze autonomy to do things like insure it or make traffic laws or so on. One of the things that I would be interested in just as a consumer is even being able to see a real-time version on a web browser and just be able to see, I can go to Anaheim, California, and just see the traffic for the first time in almost real time. Nothing like that really exists today, right?
Do you know, it's funny, we were having a conversation today with products about, what should we do? And I said, well, why don't we just not release a free app where people can see the genuine congestion in their city?
Yeah.
And why don't we go one stage further and provide us a meta twin around that environment? The overhead's huge, the processing is huge.
Sure.
But actually, we can see benefits to society of doing that. So, not promising anything, but it is one of those discussions. And we've got to be careful about how we focus. We're only a team of 315 people. We build on demand to some extent. We have something called a customer zero principle, where we are our own most unreasonable customer when we determine there is a market to deploy. But we then learn and we listen, and so it's a long journey with AVOS where we're in alpha build, where we're going to share that with a few customers this year, and we'll make some announcements. But this is a 3 to 5 year project. It will massively increase our SAM over time, but this is early days. What's irrefutable is that there are very few AV companies actually doing real tests in the world. And we want to try and engage with more OEMs and empower more of them to be able to actually start bringing forward their AV strategy. But it's going to take time.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I would love to see an app where I could see, real weather patterns and even a description on the side that's like, here's how we're deriving this information, windshield wipers, brakes. Like, yeah. I think that would be a super cool portal into the world that we just don't have today. But I want to double click on something else you just said, which is being able to really test the outputs of this AVOS. One of the things you mentioned a little earlier was building out this mule, which I assume is like a test car that has all the sensors, ingests all the data, and can accept information back from the system to be able to learn how to drive itself better. Can you talk a little bit about the way you test in the physical world, the devices, how the data flows back, the test loop basically for an actual autonomous vehicle in the world, not virtually?
Yeah, so we as you say, we built a mule. This is not a commercialized product. We are not going to be deploying our own AVs. We built a mule for OEMs to test bed their learnings. So this is a white label powertrain, EV powertrain, and then we've got LiDAR and video image processing with real time outcomes. And it's being built for test purposes. It's been built for prototyping. It's been built. And I mentioned to you just before, we have this customer zero principle. So, we came to the point, well, what do AV customers want? Well, we're now learning what they want. And we're learning that some of the limitations is physical asset deployment, is being able to learn more in cities. And digital simulation will help with some of those learnings. But we're also learning that OEMs want to just try more things out. So we built a platform. We've been building over the last 3-4 years. It's now a live product. We're going to be revealing our own mule. So we've built our own shell on his white label powertrain. All the IP is all in house. All the processing we've worked with various vendors, but the actual IP, the actual data outcome is all proprietary to Wejo, and we built it to be able to share back with the AV industry, to share back with OEMs who want to bring forward their own OEM strategy. And for us, it came hand to, we felt as well as building a digital simulation environment, we should build a physical simulation environment and actually help people understand about the data that's now coming from this new industry, and understand what can be out there. So it's hugely exciting for us.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I imagine that's a huge undertaking. So are you partnering with any companies to bring that to life, or are you building this mule from scratch yourself? How's this test car coming to be?
Yeah, I mean, so we built the mule all in house. We bought in certain parts. So the powertrain is from an OEM. So we've used it. We've got both EPAS and robotics running on that mule. On that powertrain, so we can control all the movements of the vehicle. And because of our experiences of understanding the data within the can of the car, or the Ethernet of the car, we're measuring steering ratios, so we can be very precise about how the vehicle can be moved. We've had that vehicle on racetracks where we've pinpointed movement of our vehicle all around the track. We've then gone the next stage further, and then we've implemented both GPS tracking within the vehicle, but also multiple LiDAR devices and multiple image devices, all collecting data in real time. And then we've shown actually about that vehicle driving on roads, and being aware of passengers or pedestrians on sidewalks, being aware of cyclists, being aware of pedestrians crossing the road, being aware of other vehicles, being aware of static objects. And we're sharing all this data back with society, so that we provide this full platform. And then we've skinned it. We've made it a vehicle you can sit in. And we've made a separate vehicle for the freight industry, where they want to try things out, and they want to try in freight. And freight is a really interesting one, because a lot of freight is internal, it's on private roads, and they're keen to try platforms out where they can improve their efficiency within their own warehousing and storage before they even worry about the broader roads. And it's a huge exciting time for us, but it's a test bed. It's there for industry to test, and what we want is, I said, when I see we are back in 2008, lots of reasons, and mobility needs impetus, and the demand is already getting there. You can see the demand from likes of Tesla, that people want driverless facilities in their cars. So we're providing a broader platform for industry to be able to bring forward their own AV ambitions, and we become the AVOS for that.
I didn't realize that this was a logistics story too. Naively, I thought this was more about consumer autonomous vehicles. So taking the driver out of a passenger vehicle so that they can A, get their time back even when they're on the road because an autonomous vehicle is driving them, but B, moving away from the burden of owning a vehicle to being able to use mobility as a service whenever you need one. Kind of like what you were saying earlier, Uber really built this app model so that I don't need a car. I just need a phone and a car comes to me, taking that one step further, and it's an autonomous car coming to me. But it sounds like what you're saying is it's really the whole spectrum of mobility.
We can map anything. So when we've been doing tests with our mule on a racetrack, we had to map the racetrack first time round. And I've seen other people actually employing researchers to walk around with backpacks on and retracing roads. We don't need to do that. We've built a machine learned way of being able to recreate a road within a simulation by doing a few journeys. So, and then after you've done a few journeys, we've learned the data, then the vehicle can recreate that journey and can be completely driverless as well, and or being remote controlled. And you mentioned freight before. Freight will be the first thing that starts getting mass adoption for AV. There's a lot of benefits to freight being more AV driven. There's massive inefficiencies and dependencies at the moment in more conventional sort of freight deliveries. So we think freight's going to be a really interesting one. It's for us, freight's an extension to our fleet proposition. Big logistics organizations. We talk about working with one of the world's largest logistics companies. We help them being more efficient with their current delivery drivers through their own app, where they cite to us that they're 30% more efficient in terms of deliveries because we're giving real-time data back to the drivers about where to avoid intersection issues, for example. So freight's an extension to our fleet, and everything we're doing is that we're just going deeper into the markets we already operate in, whether it's traffic management with AV for consumers, whether it's fleet, where it's AV for freight. It's just an extension of that, and we're getting incredible inbound demand for where and how we're working. So it's a huge, exciting time.
That is super exciting. We've talked a lot about the basics of the kinds of data Wejo collects and the basic use cases. We jumped into EVOS and talked about electric vehicle infrastructure, demand for charging, and addressing the needs of the utilities to scale down the costs for overall charging, and ramping up the efficiency of charging infrastructure. And we've talked about a whole bunch of use cases for autonomous vehicles, ranging from logistics to point-to-point consumer driving, all the way to insuring it, departments of transportation regulating it. So I want to make sure that we touch anything else that you want to touch.
I think we're done. I think we've done a really good hour. If you're happy with the content, I think it's been a really good hour.
Richard, as always, it was great talking to you. I'm really excited to see the future of the EVOS, the AVOS, and everything else you have in store beyond that.
Well, hey, Alex, thank you for your time today. I'm looking forward to hopefully our series of podcasts.
Yeah, looking forward to catching up with you in a quarter, if not sooner.
Perfect. Sounds good. Hey, well, great to see you.
See ya. So even though the stock market isn't favoring high-tech growth companies right now, Wejo is partnering with big players like Microsoft and Palantir to solve some big problems in self-driving cars today. All that autonomous vehicle data will unlock new use cases and ultimately new markets for Wejo to enter and use their massive amount of data for good, just a few of which were highlighted during this exclusive interview. That's a future I'm excited to invest in. A big thank you to Wejo's founder and CEO, Richard Barlow, as well as the rest of the Wejo team for making this interview happen during such an exciting time in the stock market. And of course, thank you for taking the time to hang out and learn about the science behind this stock. Until next time, this is Ticker Symbol U. My name is Alex, reminding you that the best investment you can make is in you.